Welcome to the weha.com Roundtable. I'm John Lyons, joined as always by Ronnie Newton, the managing editor of weha.com. We're going to have two segments tonight, starting with three of the Republican candidates for local office and ending with three Board of Ed Democrat candidates, with a short break where Ronnie and I are going to go over some of the news stories happening in town in between. For the first segment, we welcome two of the Republican Party endorsed candidates for town council and one of the Republican endorsed Board of Ed candidates. First, we welcome Mary Fay, the minority leader, running for her second term, I believe, on town council. Third. Oh, you're running for? I thought you were a halfway nominee. No, so this is your third election. Okay, my apologies. Running for her third term. She's also running for Congress. So you have a lot going on. So we'll get it. We're going to dive into that. Joining Mary is a second-time candidate. I hope I'm getting these numbers right. Al Cortes, right? This is your second go-around?
No, this is, I didn't get on the first time, so hopefully this will be my,
okay.
So it's the second time running.
Yeah, your second time running, correct. And then finally, our last guest for the segment is Dr. Gayle Harris, who's the GOP candidate for the Town Board of Education. This is your first go at politics, is that not correct?
Go.
So, super. So we're going to dive right in. We got a lot to talk about. I guess, first of all, Gayle, let me start with you. What made you decide to run?
So it was a bit of a difficult decision. I thought about it for a while. I've lived in this town for a very long time. Most of the last 50 years I've actually lived here. And I have raised my 4 children here. They've all benefited from the educational institutions in town.
Where'd they go to school?
Some of them went to West Hartford Public Schools, some of them went to private schools, some of them went to religious schools. So I have sort of I have 4 children, so they kind of
catering to their needs.
Yep, every child is different, every child has different needs. I myself attended the West Hartford Public Schools as well.
Where did you go? I'll ask you.
I went to King Philip and I went to Hall High School.
Terrific.
Yeah, so I've been here a long time. I am really passionate about education. That was something that I really strive for with my own children, and they've all done exceedingly well. They've all, and I attribute that to a large degree as to the educational opportunities they got here in town. So I have been involved in other educational organizations, and when Sean approached me about this, it was something that I felt like would really jive with what interests me and I have a passion for, which is making sure that kids, really get the tools and skills they need in schools. So it kind of jived with something I've been working on, not on a political stage, but in a different way.
Want me to keep rolling? You have questions?
Yeah,
all right.
keep going.
Are you keep going? Okay.
I will have questions for sure.
Okay. All right. So Mary, let's jump over to you. The first thing I want to talk about is, and I'm saying this correctly, a Connecticut party. They call themselves a Connecticut party. It's the old party of Lower Wyker. 2 of your former, folks involved, your former chair and your former minority leader, both defected the Republican Party probably about 90 days ago now. They've joined the Connecticut Party, and they've created their own slate of candidates. Talk to me. What was behind their leaving? Did they approach you about joining them? What are your thoughts on their departure? What's your thoughts on the Connecticut Party? Just tell us what's on your mind.
I prefer to talk about us. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, the Republican Party, our direction, where we're going, what the candidates have to offer. I don't really see a need to comment on that. They did what they did, which was fine. Actually, it was a big relief. They weren't going to be endorsed again, and they weren't really Republicans representing us, so that's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
And they've got a good story, and I hope people look at the records. The records tell the story. So that's it. I mean, let's spend the majority of time talking about the Republican Party and what the 3 of us have to offer, as well as Mark, our 4th candidate. I prefer that, John, if that's all right.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I have to ask the questions. That's our job.
So I guess as a
they can speak for
segue,
themselves. I mean, But
you mentioned they weren't really Republicans, but what is today's Republican Party in West Hartford? What are the
I think
the pillars that you're looking to represent?
Sure. So thank you for that. It's tough to be a Republican here. I will say that first and foremost, and I think it's evidenced, but in so many ways. I get tons and tons of letters and phone calls from people, teachers, doctors, scientists, really, really good people who love this town, have been here for a long time, And they're very candid and they're very appreciative, saying things, Mary, you're saying the things that need to be said, but I'm afraid I'm gonna lose my job. I can't come forward. Or my neighbors, I'll be shunned. My children won't be played with anymore. And that's a feeling, that's a prevalence. And that's a sad commentary of our state of our town. I really believe that. I've certainly been the recipient of some of those thoughts and disparaging things, and it's not fair and it's not right. I brought my daughter here for an educational experience. I'm trying to get her to see both sides, right, Katie? And she is seeing both sides. So I think it's time that everyone in this town was accounted for and had somebody to speak for them, and I'm willing to do that. And I am certainly not anti-Democrat. I was one at one point. The party left me. In fact, it's just got so far left. But today, let's go and move forward. So today's Republicans, I think you're going to see much more, especially in Connecticut. I think we're different than the rest of the party. Much more moderate and trying to collaborate and get things done. We do have core values around fiscal responsibility and accountability, education first, and family. Making sure that we have the resources to take care of our seniors and respect what they've given to us in our society. And a lot of other things that I think the rest of us will be more than happy to chime in. I think we're excited. It's a new time. We're seeing, gosh, a perfect example would be Arthur Ward, the longtime mayor of Newington, or Bristol, because there's something happening in Newington too, but he was a Democrat and got elected for numerous terms. I want to say 10. He was very, very popular. And he recently became a Republican because he said the party, I think what's happening, and even with the Republicans too, I give criticism to both sides where it's deserved. We've got to stop catering to the fringes. You know, the AOCs of the world who are holding the party hostage, as well as we've got some others who, you know, really are conspiracy theorists. I don't buy into any of that. And there's a big swath where most people are, and that's what we're trying to do. And granted, we are a little bit more right of center, just as Democrats are left of center, but I think we need to make sure that everybody comes to the table. So thank you, John.
So, all right, so Mary, you said something, I think, really that hit home to me just then, because I think I'm safe saying that a lot of people from both parties are worried about the fringes. So you're describing yourself as a centrist. I don't know you well. So back to Ronnie's question, can we drill down? What are as a centrist, what are the tenets? Like, let's talk about community safety. I know you've talked a lot about that. Give us some of your thoughts on, you know, how do we keep West Hartford safe, or how do we make it safer? I mean, what's your view of the current situation, and what can we do?
I support our first responders, particularly our law enforcement individuals, and our chief, very, very much so. I think he's an excellent police chief, and we're lucky to have him here in West Hartford. I think what's happened, though, is that we've gotten to a tipping point where well-intentioned laws, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, have created situations where juveniles are not held accountable, and they're repeat offenders, and the violence is escalating with carjackings by gunpoint and shots being fired and people put in trunks and cars set on fire. You know the story. So it's really ratcheting up. And the numbers, some are up. I think nationwide they're up, in fact. But we can't have these kind of laws in place. And I don't believe that our Democrat delegation, it is what it is. They are all Democrats, are responding fast enough. They're not even back in session for this purpose. Governor Lamont denies that there's an issue. And if we don't recognize that we have an issue, you can't solve it. So I think we need more community policing. We need to support these guys. They can't chase, they can't pursue. We've got ATVs now. And if they know that nothing can be done, it's going to keep going and escalating. And I'm fearful of that. So it's a realistic fear. It's not fear-mongering. It's really out there. So I know every time, my habits have changed. I used to go run errands and have my coffee in the car, and I'd stop and I would, respond to emails, respond to constituents, do what I needed to do. Now, I don't do that anymore because I don't know who's coming around me or who's parking near me, and you gotta keep yourself safe, so we all have to be vigilant. But I think community policing we need the laws changed. We absolutely positively do, because they're not delivering the desired result. And so it's the juvenile laws, as well as the pursuit and some other things. But the police accountability really hurt. And now now we're facing retirements. These guys are all retiring at huge numbers. I actually talked to a West Hartford officer the other day, really good sergeant, in fact, and he's leaving, 28 years. I don't think he really wants to, but he said it's tough out there, so we need to support them.
Al, how about you? What's on your mind? What are your big issues? What are your passions? Why are you running? What are you looking to accomplish?
One of the reasons I'm running is, I came from Hartford, so I'm born and raised in Hartford, moved around a lot in Hartford as a kid. And at one point, I was one of these at-risk youth that we're talking about. So for me to get to West Hartford, when I got to West Hartford, that was a big deal for me. It's something that I never thought would happen growing up. I was always reminded how, I have limitations of where I can go, as far as growing, and don't have high expectations, don't even consider college, because, you'll be lucky to get, just a job as a laborer or something to that effect, So now that I'm in West Hartford, I don't settle. I want more, and I have 2 boys, and I want them to have more. I don't want them to go through what I went through. So I'm passionate about, speaking up for people. My oldest has autism, so I got involved with Autism Speaks and had an opportunity to advocate. And I feel that serving on town council gives me that opportunity to advocate for those that are scared to speak up. And right now is the crime issue. I have a background, with Department of Corrections, 20 years working there. I worked at a youth prison, so I see, what the at-risk youth, go through in the youth prison. They get housed in there. Not the best setup right now. They just kind of, it's almost like a game. They're playing in there. There's no, almost like people forgot about them. They don't care. They don't address the mental health issues. Education is not the best because, the enrollment is constantly changing because it's like a revolving door in there. And then I feel once they leave the system, there's no accountability. Like we're not, as a community, we should be accountable. There's no follow through. You just let them out. So right now, this what in the General Assembly, what they push is like, let's use the tools we have already, right? So let's do the information sharing. So that's happening. But a youth, if a youth gets arrested, they can only be held for 6 hours, right? So they tell us, all right, they're held for 6 hours and then they're sent home, But or sent to a guardian. But if that doesn't take place, they're just let go. So there's no accountability. So this kid, you've arrested this youth, and 6 hours, no one comes to pick him up. You just let him out the front door. So how are we being accountable?
Now, how do we define a youth? Under 18 or under 21?
Well, that's what's interesting in Connecticut. It keeps, we keep trying to change it. At one point we're looking at 25. Considering youth up to 25. I don't know the reason behind that, and I don't know if you consider youth 25 on certain things and laws, but 21 and under right now is youth. So the youth prison in Connecticut houses 14 to 21-year-olds.
So it's fascinating for me, and Ronnie, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to steal all the questions here, but it's fascinating because you've worked with, so you've got more firsthand experience, probably than a whole lot of people combined, having done this for, you said 20 years?
Yes.
So, and I'm hearing you say they need to be treated differently, and I agree, I want to say I agree with you. I'm not trying to be combative with you at all, because they are youths. Is there an easy answer? What's the answer? And I know there's not an easy answer, and I know I'm asking a tough question here, Al.
No, it's not tough at all, and there is no easy answer. And I think in politics, especially at the state level, we make problems so big that they seem difficult to solve. So I like to break things down. I have to. With I grew up in Hartford. I did not go to college. So I got to where I'm at by teaching myself. And the way I do things is you make a big problem, make it smaller, and start chipping away at it. And then sometimes through the military, what I learned is that you might have to readjust. You start going forward, that might not work. You might have to take a left. You might have to take a right. So I think that's how we have to address this issue. Look at what we can fix now. So real quick, they came up with the information sharing,
Yep.
Great first step, but we still have to do more, Let's look at what is in Department of Corrections. Let's look at what you're using in there already and what are people's roles. So there's a DCF personnel working there 6 years. I don't know what that personnel does. So DCF does have an involvement with the youth. So instead of assigning them a probation officer, maybe you assign them a DCF worker and you start the process from within the prison, so when they go out to the community, they've already engaged with the person that's being accountable for them, so let's, so look at things different, outside the box, I think.
So let me give you 10 seconds or 15 seconds. I'm giving you a platform right now. People watch our show. Hopefully Jillian is either watching, going to watch, Derek, Kate, and Tammy. What's your, 2-3 sentence, what's your appeal to them?
So my appeal to them, being an at-risk youth, growing up in Hartford, I was once an at-risk youth. I, ran into trouble myself, but there was accountability. There was a cost, there was. So we need to look at, one, just keeping track of these youth. Let's. It's not about being, punishing them, but there has to be, a progressive discipline. So yeah, sure, 6 hours we can hold you, we let you go. But next time, you're gonna stay until you're seeing a judge. So there has to be progressive discipline, and that way we're tracking these youth a lot better. So now this information is out there a little bit more. There's a youthful offender program. So when they turn 21, if they outgrow these issues, if they become successful in life, the record is expunged. People don't know that this happens. So we're not limiting their life. But we also have to be accountable as a community once they get outside. And how do we do that? I think we have tools. We just have to see if we're using them the right way.
Complex problems.
Yes.
So, Ronnie, I have to
Yeah,
tell you
no,
a question.
I'd like to just actually take this really to the very local level. So what can the West Hartford Town Council or the Board of Education really do about crime, since a lot of these are statewide issues, and I understand advocating these ideas to the state delegation, but what about in West Hartford specifically? Do you think there's anything that the town council or the Board of Education can do to combat crime, to anything that we can do to support the police more than we do, or to support programs for students in the schools who might be at risk?
So I've been proactive. I've sat down and spoken to members from the Judiciary Committee, one Republican, one Democrat, Jillian Gilchrist. I had the pleasure of speaking to her yesterday and just having conversations and introducing myself and talking about my concerns. And I think that's what we need to do. It's funny, if you ask people if they've had that conversation, even on a town council level, how many people can sit there and say, yes, I reached out specifically for this, and I think we all need to get involved. It's kind of a crisis right now, so it should not just be the Public Safety Committee being involved. I think as town council members, we have that obligation, because this affects business. This affects whatever committee you're on, gets affected by crime. Panhandling is one of the most common things we see in town. So that's another complex issue. How do we address that? And there needs to be, again, you create a system where you have accountability. You put ordinance in places, and so you can target what the problem is. Why is this person standing at a corner? Is it a mental health issue? We have a social worker, so then we can work with that social worker and not waste her time, and actually, be able to point out, okay, this person has mental health issues, this person's taking advantage of the system, so maybe we find this person, and this person has food insecurity problems. We have a food pantry. Let's make sure that we're attending to these needs. So I think with the crime piece, if we start addressing it, you get to learn a lot more about people and why they're doing what they're doing, and we can help them out.
Let's change topics, and Gayle, we are going to get to you. We're going to focus on council stuff here, but we are going to get to you, I promise. Mary, you voted against the bond initiative, and I don't want to misquote anything, but you had other ideas as to how to handle the long-term obligations for the town. What were some of your ideas, and if you're elected, and if one day you become the majority party here and you're serving as a majority leader, what are your ideas? What would you want to do and try to pass?
Thank you, John, for
Yep.
that.
Yep.
It's very complicated too. None of these problems are easy, and if they were easily solved with simple solutions, you wouldn't need any of us. Well, the pensions are interesting, and it's a long time problem. They've been underfunded for a number of years, at the 28%, and they're very vulnerable to market changes and whatnot. So I think taking on more debt to the tune of $300 million in order to bring them up to fully funded in one fell swoop was an awful lot of debt for the town to absorb. And it's going to limit some of our abilities going forward. Now, you will note that municipalities don't do this as a solution. I think they hardly ever happen. They're poorly looked upon from a financial standpoint. sort of kicking the can down the road again. You know, we have to pay that debt now over 30 or 40 years. We have to pay the interest. And it just limits our flexibility. So an alternate solution would be to offshore the entire, now this is technical. I am a pension wonk. This is my businesses that I've run in the past. But
I don't mind getting in the weeds. This is good. This is good.
I'm trying to bring it up.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
You know, you can take that liability, so to speak, and you can off it to an insurance or a reinsurer, and it's completely off, and there's no more liability, there's no more debt, there's nothing. Now, you have to come up with a premium, but that could be financed, et cetera, and some of the reinsurers will work with you to have a payment that we can afford. So that would be one way to do it, and then it's gone. What we run the risk of now with the bonding is that we're still subject to all those market fluctuations. We're still subject to the liability going up. We're still subject to people working longer, so it accrues. We haven't taken overtime out of pensions, things like that. Now it's difficult. They're all union employees, and it needs negotiation, and they're tough negotiators. They don't want to give an inch. So having said that, we just have to make sure that we really tighten our belt going forward for the new employees, and just make sure that the benefits aren't so rich that we get into this problem again, and we are more in parity with the private sector, because we just can't, we can't afford it. These things were designed when people retired at 65 and they lived to 70. That was it. Now they're retiring after 20 years. They're living to 90. They have COLAs, so that it's upside down, and they're just. That's why people don't offer them, because they can't. It almost brought GE down to its knees, so it's a very serious problem. But those are the reasons. I hope that makes sense. And even now, interest rates are even lower than when we borrowed at. So I just thought there was risk at the transaction level. I do admire the council for taking it on and realizing we had to shore up our balance sheet. I just don't think this was the optimal way to do it.
Okay, all right. Al, I know you weren't serving at the time, but you know what was your take on the bond initiative?
So, for me, at the town level, it's funny, at the state level, I understand a little bit more. At the town level, it seems pretty complex. It's something that's that is challenging, you know, and I don't want us to end up like we are at a state level. You know, at a state level, the pension is severely underfunded, so we have to look at solutions and make sure that we don't start following suit with how the state of Connecticut is handling their pension, and that was my concern with the direction we went. I'm not savvy with the whole financial piece, but you know, I do have my concerns because I do receive a pension also from the state level, and I know the issues we're having currently, you know, at the state with the pensions, and I don't think that, you know, West Hartford, we're starting to grow so much that we need to watch our risks, you know.
I'm going to keep rolling, Ron, unless
Yeah,
you got
that's
anything.
fine, that's
Okay, all right. Let's talk about, I know, Mary, we've touched on, and this is really for both of you, we've touched on quality of life stuff, but let's talk about specifically panhandling. Since the beginning of COVID, we've seen a massive spike in panhandlers in town. There are, you know, intersections over off of New Britain. There are intersections obviously in town, and I believe in Bishop's Corners, where you can count on virtually every day, 9 to 5, they treat it like a job, panhandling. And residents are giving them money. You know, Ronnie sees it all the time, I see it all the time, where people give them money. What are your thoughts on that? How do we handle that?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about it is, having analyzed it and worked with the council and trying to figure out a way, what we land upon typically after going through a lot of motions is that it's not illegal in and of itself, the action. So it truly is a First Amendment issue, freedom of speech. So you get that out of the way, and that covers a lot of it. So then you have the people, I think Alberto described, some who need help, absolutely. And we do have social folks going out there, social workers and our health personnel, and they know who these folks are. They've identified them. They know their names, they know where they live, if they have homes, which ones need assistance, and so on. And I think a few folks, they've been able to get into the social service program and actually really help. Some are just, well, they're scamming the system, and they know that people are generous at heart. I mean, it's hard for me to drive by these folks and not be tempted to, you know, give them money because some of them really truly do need help. So it's complicated, but I think why they target West Hartford, and there's a good and bad part to this, because I'm all over Greater Hartford with a bunch of different activities, and you don't see it. Now, granted, we're different. We have a robust downtown. We've got lots of stoplights there. We've got people who are shopping, out having a good time. What's another couple bucks? But you don't really see it elsewhere, even in Glastonbury, where there's, and I go there a lot. My two sisters live there. And, you know, you don't see it. And they have a little downtown and things like that. You just don't see it. So I think it speaks to the heart of our community, which is large, which part of the reason we all love living here. I think people are very giving but it perpetuates the problem. So again, good intentioned things end up making it more. And I know some folks that actually avoid parts of town where the panhandlers are because either it's draining to them to see it and so prevalent, or they just don't want to deal with it and would prefer to not face them. But it's challenging. Now, what I do know from the Public Safety Committee is that if they're aggressively panhandling and actually approach your vehicle or approach you, then the police can get involved and remove them from the situation or from the site. But short of that, I think people who wish to donate to them really considered another way to do that, either through the Town That Cares Fund or some other, the food pantry, because then it would discourage people from doing the panhandling and they would actually come in for help. So again, I wish these were easier to solve, but I think what's important for the viewers who are listening in to hear is that nobody is dismissive of the issues that come before us from the general public or from residents, and we are trying to find a solution, but we want to be humane and be fair and you know, do the best we can. And the easy answer is don't give to these folks anymore, and they'll go elsewhere. They'll go, like, why does the guy rob banks? Because that's where the money is. They'll go somewhere where they'll get more money.
Hard to convince a community of almost 60,000 though to not give.
It truly is.
Especially a giving community. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
and that's where it's. You know, I think as much as it's one of those quality of life nuisance crimes, if you will, I think we have bigger fish to fry, quite frankly. And I haven't heard from any of the shop people or owners or restaurant that, I'm very connected to the business community, as we all are, but I haven't heard that it's curtailing business, so to speak. But if it does, then we're really gonna have to take a different approach. Thank you.
Ronnie, anything? No? I feel like I'm still in the show.
That's fine. I'm listening. I think that's a complete answer. So, I mean, a lot of these questions, there aren't any easy answers.
Yeah, there's no easy answers, yeah.
And also panhandling it's not really a partisan issue either. It's like everybody wants to figure out a way to do something about it, and there is no silver bullet that's going to cause it to just magically go away. I do know from conversations I've had with Chief Riddick that he is working with other regional law enforcement agencies, because while people in West Hartford might want to send the panhandlers to Newington or, you know, Hartford or Glastonbury, the law enforcement doesn't really want to just push the problem to another town. So they're looking at regionally how to address the problem. And that is something that is going on. I had written a pretty detailed article on panhandling. I guess it was about a year ago, and have been following up on what's been happening since then.
All right, Mary, next question, but I'll definitely weigh in. Let's talk about taxes. Mary, you've been very, very vocal. I think, you know, from what I understand and from what I know of you, you know, probably your top vocal issue has been taxes and the tax burden on folks in town. What could we do differently to try to lower the tax? The ACP party, which we're not going to talk about, but they've proposed, among other things, merging Hall and Conard into Honard or Call. I'm not sure what we would call it. But,
Yes.
so they proposed that. But all kidding aside, you know, even a school closure is not a huge savings. relative to the size of the town budget. Even the sale of a school property and the building is not a huge saving. So how do we lower the tax burden on residents here? Which, I think a lot of people agree with you, Ty.
Yeah, and I think, again, so with our 200 and change 20 million budget, it's a very difficult question because the answer is that it's mostly personnel. And it takes a lot of folks to run a town of our size, our complexity, our different areas. So it's people mostly. There's some other things. So what I would like to see, and again, the two-school idea, I give anybody, that's a creative thing, but I worry about that because we should ask Katie what she thinks about one school in West Hartford, but.
Katie's off camera. Where do you go, Katie? Where do you go? Do you go to Hall or Conard?
She would go to Hall. She's in.
Yeah, we're
King
not
Philip
going,
right now.
we're not,
Okay.
she's not
Yeah.
mic'd, so
But-
we're not
but
going to
I-
hear her.
sorry. Yep,
No,
okay.
that's I was wondering what she would think about
Yeah,
that. So
that's why I was curious. Yep.
there's a lot of negatives. I think people like their neighborhood schools. I used to volunteer in Morley where she went before KP. Now they get to an age where you're not in the schools anymore. I really miss that. I really enjoyed doing that. But that's one idea. But I went to I'm from East Hartford, as you know, and went to Penny High School. We had Penny in East Hartford. It was a great rivalry, the Turkey Day game, and it was. And we got along. I have great friends from East Hartford High School. Now that's just one, and it's too big. Kids are getting lost in the shuffle. It's real. It would be about the same size as Hall and Conard combined. And they went to one middle school. It's too much. It's just not working really in the educational scores and how they rank the schools. It's really created an issue. Now they do have the baccalaureate, which is the #1 school in the state and built inside Penny High School, but the rest is not really performing well. So I wouldn't be for that. But one thing we do about the budgeting is that we do a roll forward. So we take the prior year's budget, we roll it forward, we account for inflation, and that becomes our next year's for the most part. And we ask questions and we try to drill down. But I'd like to see a line by line and I don't want to scare anybody. I am not a person who doesn't value people and employees. I've led lots of large teams of 1,000 people and more. I wouldn't I would ask for a moratorium and I'd say, show me your budget line by line by line, each department head, and then what do you need and what can we do without? And I bet you we could find savings, but we don't do it that way. So I would just, for the time being, until we figured out exactly the lay of the land beneath the roll forwards, how many people do we really need? What can be automated? How many subscriptions or this service or whatever we're doing, do we really need it? And then you would find things, and then you could actually combine some things, and I wouldn't lay off anybody. I would do it through attrition. We have retirements coming up. I wouldn't, I don't want people to get worried that they're going to lose their jobs because they don't have to. There's other ways that we can save. And perhaps we can do something. I've just gotten an inventory because I asked for it of all the buildings that the town owns. And there's an awful lot that we could probably combine some things and, get rid of the building, sell it, or some other things. We could free up some capital, reduce our footprint, which would also reduce our energy footprint as well. Gosh, I'm getting tongue-tied. I'm sorry. Been on the phone all day today. But there's a lot of different ideas that I think we can, but it's not easy either. It takes a lot to run the town of this size. Our libraries, so people always ask, well, if you're going to propose to do something with taxes and with the budget, what are you going to cut? Well, I think we do have to take a harder look, but I think if we do it department by department, line by line, we're going to find things without cutting things that people value. That would be my hope, and that's what I've been able to do in business throughout my career. I do think we have to look at some pretty bold ideas, because my biggest concern with taxes, because you'll hear some people who don't think it's an issue, and that's terrific if they're in a position where they don't feel that having one of the highest mill rates in the state and paying double what you might get in a comparable town for the same house and property taxes. That's terrific. But seniors are having the trouble staying here. Young families are struggling. COVID's really hurt. Now we've got inflation with everything else. So one idea that I had that I think would be perfect is seniors make a lot of sense to keep here. First of all, they're lovely people. They've got wisdom. They do a lot for their neighborhoods. They paid their dues. They don't use the schools, so there's a savings there. We want them to stay here. First, for who they are. Second of all, because they're efficient from the cost standpoint, from a tax base. So why don't we just give them a break? Why don't we freeze their taxes of where they were at age 70 and see how that goes? And obviously, we'd have to make up the rest somewhere else, but we could do that through either reducing costs or something else. But I think people deserve a break, and it's a conundrum because they're outpacing inflation. They're doubling every 7 or 8 years, and we can't continue that trend.
Al, let me just, we've got to start to look at the clock a little bit, and I want to
Yeah.
spend some time with Gayle. So I'm going to, a final question for you, and Mary, chime in, at least from me, is how do we, what are your ideas to grow the tax base, to increase tax revenue, via growth, industry, residential development?
Again, that very difficult to do, especially because, where we're at with taxes right now. Our taxes are high, values of home are high, so one of the big things we try to look at is, making West Hartford more affordable for families. But where we're at right now, that's a hard sell. That's something hard to do. So I think we need to start we need to, as Mary said, let's go through things one by one on line items, and we don't have to figure out. We can pick departments. Like this year we'll audit a couple departments and really drive in, and let's keep our costs down. Everybody asks, what do we cut? It's
But I'm talking about how do we
Yeah,
grow
how do
the
we,
tax base?
like,
How do
so
we
on the
grow-
other
how do we do the
hand,
opposite side of it?
Yeah, so how
growing
do we
the grand list, how would
Yeah.
you encourage development? And what type of development?
Well, and that's the thing, So I think with overdeveloping with housing right now, we're starting to go the wrong direction. We're getting these luxury apartments, and it's great, right? We're making use of space, but how do we attract other business? What's nice about West Hartford, or what attracted me about West Hartford, was small businesses, right? But you're starting to see it's starting to be more difficult to be a small business in town. So how do you appeal to these small businesses? So I think it's focusing on maybe some marketing to try to or even develop certain areas like New Park Ave. How we started with the Gastro Park, and kind of continue on there, and make that more of a community feel instead of like an industrial park feel, which is it's kind of starting to build. And it's I think that's a great example.
Do you support tax incentives to help promote and inspire development, either business or residential?
For businesses, I think that's a fine line, because then there's how do you do it the right way, and how do you do it fair for everyone else, We have a tax moratorium on, one business in town, first time we've ever done that, but how about other businesses that also bring value? We haven't given them that opportunity, The Yukon property is another good example. It's we didn't use a moratorium for there, and that's becoming an eyesore on our town. So I think we have to keep it fair. Now, as far as for residential, I think that's something we could look at. It's do we change, like how high the taxes are in a certain neighborhood? Change the mill rate, so it maybe have like a floating mill rate, so this side of town the mill rate is slightly higher, but over here slightly lower, just to encourage people to come over. But it's not. There's no popular answer for it.
Yeah, so one thing that I'd like to see and is the enterprise zones that our prior president had established, and we've got some in West Hartford, and they're zones that really need development. They're either in locations that aren't being utilized for whatever reason, so there's lots of empty spaces or older buildings that could be redeveloped. We should use those, and we should get developers in here to do some things for us. Like, let's put an apartment building in one of those zones. It would help with the transportation, because these areas tend to be on bigger lines. They either have buses or some sort of transportation. So I think that's something that we could make the city, our town, more walkable. But I would also like to see a company that's based here have a second sort of mini headquarters where we can actually focus on our insurance capabilities and InsurTech. So let's kind of have a little center where we can have draw from that, and we can have engineers stay here and actuaries stay here, and we need the job. So I'd like to see some of that happening. Maybe we focus
What
on more-
Ideanomics was going to do?
Well, yes, but probably
In
not.
theory,
Yes,
in
yes,
theory,
something like
yeah.
that. You know what? It's too bad we didn't even get to see the plans
Yeah.
for that, because I think that could have been a really great opportunity for both, a museum kind of aesthetic as well as some offices and some business, as well as some learning and some tech. You know, I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that it's a residential area, so I don't know that's the perfect site for something like that. But there are sites that would work for that. But yeah, you're right. I was really intrigued by that idea. I wasn't sure that was the right place for it, but anyway, I think we can establish West Hartford and be different. You know, it's in some sense, it's kind of disappointing that UConn left, because I think we could have gotten a branch of that college to focus on machining, or manufacturing, like they're doing over at Goodwin College for UTC. Well, now it's Raytheon. Everything changes. But you know, sort of put an outpost and a post in the ground that says, hey, this is what West Hartford's about. We want businesses here. I would love to work and live in town. How great would that be? And I think we've got the infrastructure and the people to make something like that really work.
Let's talk about, so when we had the Democrat candidates in here back in August or July, late July, whenever it was, one of the things we talked a lot about was Ben Winograd led an effort. It took him many years, but it did pass this past session, of accessory dwellings, ADUs, and accessory dwelling units, which allow a second smaller home, you know, but potentially could increase, you know, the tax base. I call it, when Ben and I have discussed it offline, I call it the Burlington model, Burlington, Vermont, which has all these beautiful, rich homes, you know, rich in history. I mean, kind of like the east end of West Hartford, the west end of Hartford. And what Burlington has done is they've taken these houses, they've permitted owners who don't want big houses anymore, there's a trend towards smaller houses, to, without changing the exterior, to divide them into sellable units. And A, it's made housing more affordable, and B, it's created additional tax revenue for the town without impacting the existing residents. What would your position be on a concept of that nature, what I call the Burlington model?
That's interesting, because I have a niece who went to University of Vermont. They're doing that in Saratoga too, which also
Yeah,
has
there's a lot of communities. I just know a lot about Burlington.
Yeah. So I have friends still who live up there. And I think it makes sense for some things. These, like over in Manchester, they're trying to decide what to do with the Cheney Mills. Those mansions that the Cheney brothers had, the Silk Mills, they're huge. I mean, it's not the model that people are looking for today. But you don't want to destroy the structure. So I think that makes sense. What you described, John, really makes sense for some of our really large, don't know what to do to repurpose. You can turn them into condos.
So you would, I'm going to put you on the spot, Mary.
Yeah,
you would
of course.
commit to work with Ben to advance something of this nature as long as it were agreeable to you?
Well, I think we should look at everything. Absolutely. I'm not someone who just stands in the way of progress. Of course, I do have concerns about the ADUs, but that's a completely different thing than what we're talking about today. But I could, yeah, absolutely. I could see something like that being, but I would want it to be something that was private investor funded and under, you know, where they take the risk. I wouldn't want the town to get into the real estate business to take on the risk of they don't sell, they don't work, the
Right.
contractor
No,
bailed.
yeah.
But I don't want to be in the real estate business. But yeah, absolutely. There are some historic figures that we have in this town. We have lots of beautiful, large homes. And as demographics and things change, what are we going to do with those? I would hope that destruction isn't the first idea that pops into somebody's head.
And no, like I said, the Burlington model, as I understand it, is there's no exterior changes permitted.
Yeah.
The changes come from within the wall. So you still have these beautiful, graceful mansions, but in fact, they're 4 condominium units. My nephew, my wife's brother's son, he owns the top floor of an absolutely breathtaking mansion right in downtown Burlington. He never could have afforded in a lifetime to own the entire mansion.
Yeah.
But now he owns it. His taxes are reasonable. He's right in the center of town, and that's where you want to be.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I think that makes really, really, really good sense. In fact, where did I see this? I know Saratoga for sure.
A lot of communities do
yeah.
it. Yeah, we don't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. I think it's worth exploring. I think, you know, of course, depending on what the zoning is on where that home is, and we'd have to get input, like we always do, the outreach from the neighbors in the neighborhoods. But that's an idea that I think is exciting. Absolutely, I do.
Yeah, that's definitely, you know, zoning it, you know, is definitely doing it the right way, you know, talking to the neighbors, and it's thinking outside the box, you know, and I think that's what we need to do, especially with, you know, the housing options, the limited housing options we have in town currently. So that would,
There's definitely a land shortage.
yes, definitely.
Yeah. That would solve our tax problem, if we could just add, 100,000 square, acres to, to
But that's a unique, I was just thinking about it because I hadn't really thought about this idea before necessarily, but, because usually the developer brings it, but we could actually push this as a
Yeah,
economic
so-
development
right.
and think about it. So maybe it's a case where the sum of the parts, so if you had 4 condos or what have you, might exceed
They do, in Burlington.
right, so you'd actually, the town would actually do well with some economic opportunities by doing that with taxes. I like that.
Ronnie, any more questions on
No,
that?
I think we need to give Gayle a
Yeah,
chance
I agree.
to say something else.
So, Gayle, I'll start. Let's start with, what do the schools do right? What do the schools do wrong? And what do you bring to the table to solve what you feel is wrong?
So I think that the school system in West Hartford is obviously a very good school system. I think that people, often move to this community because of the school system. So obviously I think the schools are doing a pretty good job educating our children. I will note that we have slipped somewhat if you look at some of the national metrics over the last few years. From where the schools were a few years ago to where they are now. So I think that's something that we have to sort of be cognizant of, that we are having education and critical skills as the #1 priority in the schools. So,
I just wanted to clarify. I report on the kind of top schools, the reports every year. I actually don't recall that there has been a slippage. Is there one particular?
I think if you look at the U.S. News and World Report, if you go back a few years, some of the schools seem to have higher metrics than they do now. I mean, it's not a huge slippage, but I think that there potentially has been some.
What's caused that? Like, what's behind that slippage?
So I think that, schools, the mission of schools is education. And it's traditionally always been education for as long as schools or public school systems have existed. And I think that, we are mandated, or our mission should be to make sure that when our kids get out of these schools, that they've got the skills to succeed in life, and that they have critical thinking skills to be able to think about things and make good decisions for themselves. So, I think that we have to be, focused on basic education, and maybe some of the Board of Education has been a little bit distracted potentially with things that aren't really related directly to educating our kids. Obviously, we've had COVID, and there's been a lot of disruption and things like that, but, I speak to teachers every day in my practice. I have a lot of teachers that come to see me, and the gap of where kids were a few years ago and where they are now, is pretty impressive. So some of that is due to COVID, but some of it could be due to other issues as well. I think we have to really focus on the basics of education. I mean, that's something that I feel really strongly about.
And do you think our current Board of Ed has lost that focus?
I think that we're distracted with a lot of different things, and some of that we can't entirely control because we have a pandemic going on, and some of it maybe we can control. So I think that we have to realize what's going on in terms of our kids' education, in terms of academics and basic education, and really put our funds and our, these special funds that we got from the federal government towards educating our children on the basics.
Ronnie, you have any more questions for Board of Ed?
So actually, just and I think we probably don't have the time to explore this, but with both the Town Council and Board of Ed candidates, but American Rescue Plan Act funds, it's a huge sum of money, both on the town side and on the school side. So I'm going to address this question to you, Gayle. I think the schools have something like $15 million to spend over the next couple of years. They have allocated some, or they have planned out how the money is going to be spent. But do you think there are any priorities that you would want to see those funds go to?
Well, again, just sort of reiterating a little bit what I just said, I think when we're faced with the knowledge gap that we currently have with our kids, and we also have, tremendous other issues going on. I speaking to a friend of mine who's a pediatrician in town, and she's been telling me that the amount of psychological and emotional problems that kids have is just, manyfold more than it was, say, a year and a half ago. So I think that the funds should be primarily spent in the classrooms, trying to make up what has been lost over the last year and a half. I think that everything else is nice, but we want to make sure that our kids come out at the end of 12 years of school with the skills to go on to the next phase of their lives and be successful. And that should be the primary mission of the schools, and I think that the funds that we have should primarily be used towards that. There may be obviously some funds, I would assume, that have to be used for things like that are also related to COVID, like infrastructure that had to be changed and possibly technology that had to be dealt with because of the pandemic. But the primary focus, again, should be education of our students.
Okay. Last word for each of you. Mary, what's your parting shot? Why should we vote for you?
Yeah, I think.
Two sentences.
You got it.
Just the time. No disrespect
Yeah,
to Ted.
you got it. Well, I think I bring a lot of insight. I think I know I will represent everybody, truly. And I work very hard to understand the issues. I think I've done a great job as a counselor. And we need all voices. And the two-party system does work. And I really hope I've earned your vote. And I look forward to seeing you on November 2nd. Thank you.
Okay. Al?
So what I bring in a strong public safety background. I also bring a strong community background. So I'm willing to, talk to the residents of West Hartford, listen to the residents of West Hartford, but also work together with the other council members to come up with solutions. We need to actually do the work and, a little less talking. I feel that, we've been talking a lot for a while, but things tend to grow, and I'm willing to do the hard work. So I look forward to your support on November 2nd.
All right. Gayle?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this opportunity. It's something I really feel passionate about, that our kids are getting a good education, and that I'm really willing to do the work and work hard so that I make sure that every student in our town gets the education that they deserve.
Okay.
So I look forward to your support on November 2nd.
And I do want to remind our viewers, every single elected position in town, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, it's a volunteer position. These folks are not paid. They're doing it because they care about our community. Whether you agree or disagree with their political views, please keep that in mind in the discourse and the discussions that happen. So I want to thank each of you. What's going to happen is we're going to stay live here. These three, they're going to slip out behind the camera, hopefully, smoothly. Ronnie and I are going to talk about a couple of stories that are going on. We're going to get the other three set up. We're going to talk all about schools, and we're going to come back with the other three. So, again, thank you.
Thank you so
all.
much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So Ronnie, we do have a couple of news stories. Well, the big one I wanted to talk to you about, and we were texting when you were away this weekend, was this horrible graffiti that happened at, what was it, the Little League field?
Yeah, at the former Yukon campus. I won't even say what it said. I mean, people
Yeah,
in
let's
town,
not say the
know,
person's name.
I think know what it was said, but
Yep.
it's hateful that people will stoop to that level of making accusations against somebody
Yeah.
and doing it in a public place where it's bound to get the most visibility it possibly can.
Right, where there's loads of kids. And yeah, it was horrifying, and I just think that if, God forbid if there is any shred of truth to any sort of accusation, there's a way to go about it, and writing it in chalk, on the blacktop where thousands of kids and parents will see it is not the way to go about it. But that story really disturbed me. So that's why I want to spend a few minutes today talking about that. And I feel certainly terribly for the person that was.
I want to talk about some good things instead.
Yeah, let's good.
So-
I didn't know what this meant. I was curious. You wrote
Oh,
this down. I didn't know what that
it
meant.
said American Rescue Plan,
Oh,
ARP.
okay.
I wrote left-handed.
You wrote, I know, I'm looking, I'm like, ARP, I'm looking through my notes, so we got to it.
I did ask that question, but I want to talk about our mugs here.
Yes, okay, we're gonna
so-
plug a sponsor that has given us mugs, but they've not paid us right.
No, I actually bought the mugs.
you bought these?
I did. I
Okay.
bought you that's my gift
that's
to you,
very
John.
nice of you, Ronnie. Thank you.
So these mugs say WeHa, but there's no hyphen there, so it's not exactly our same logo. But this is WeHa Brewing and Roasting, and it's WeHa Coffee. I don't have coffee in it now because it's evening, but although I am known to sometimes drink coffee at the evening.
I can go like this, so we can go like this to each other. so.
But one of the things that we talked about actually in the previous discussion was kind of the development in different parts of town. And WeHa Brewing and Roasting is on Shield Street. It's right next to the Shield Street Post Office. And it's kind of a sign of some of the development of a part of town that maybe hasn't had as much
People
focus.
forget about that part of town, really.
So I was talking to somebody who's part of what they have called the design district, and they're actually really kind of trying to change the focus of it to have it just called the district, which I think is a really cool idea. Mayor Cantor calls that part of West Hartford kind of the Brooklyn of West Hartford. It's got a steampunk, grittier, industrial feel, and WeHa Brewing and Roasting has that kind of feel, and they've got beer and coffee and
All right, so give
two of my
us,
favorite things.
so give us a little bit, because you got to try out, whoops. I got a computer in front of me there. You got to try out the goods, so tell me, how's their coffee, or did you try out the beer? What did you try out when you
Of
were?
course, I tried out both, and both are excellent.
What
I
time
had
of day was this?
I had the coffee in the morning at about 9:30, and I had the beer in the early evening.
Okay.
After their ribbon cutting, so
Okay.
they were having people sample their beer, and I had the Mo and Low, which is their IPA, and it's named for two of the dogs, the owner's dogs,
Okay.
Mosaic, who's a husky, and Logan, who is, I think, a Jack Russell Terrier. Don't blame me if I got that one wrong, but the two dogs that hang out in the brewery, and
Do they have food?
they don't have food right now.
Okay.
They will have food. A kitchen is going to be opening up. I think they're going to be having food trucks in the interim.
That's like an old school, this is porcelain, right?
It is, I think it's porcelain.
Yeah,
I don't know.
think, these are, like, immediately when you gave this to me and opened up. By the way, Board of Ed guys, come on in if you hear me, if you're not mic'd, if you're mic'd up. We're waiting for our three guests to walk in. They're here, we know they're here, they're in the green room. So, we're waiting for them to come in, but they're in the process of being mic'd up. But, I love the mug. Yeah,
Yeah.
it has that kind of really
Yeah.
old school porcelain feel to it, so, it's.
So, and some other, like, there are a lot of other really kind of cool businesses that have opened in that part of West Hartford within the last couple of years. New Park Brewing, which continues to expand.
Yep.
And then the Gastro Park, which is actually having their grand opening on Thursday. That's opened little by little. It had just the outside open, and then they opened Purgatory Coffee Roasters inside, and Small State Provisions, which has incredible bread and other baked goods. So those are kind of very cool businesses that are operating in the New Park Avenue corridor. And there is one new apartment building, well, the retail operation's not open yet, but it will be a multi-use building, and then there's another one under construction now.
Good, good.
And
So,
we got a
that's
couple
what we
other
need.
new restaurants that have just opened in West Hartford. Both have street in their name. We've got Zephyr's Street Pizza and Toro Mexican Street Food, so kind of new and different takes on.
I love Mexican food, so
Yeah.
I love pizza too. That's probably too much of that food. So I think we probably just have to do. Our producer Jen is in the room, and I think we probably have to do a mic check. Jen, do we have to do that, or are we good? Give me a thumb up. Are we good, or do you need a voice check? Oh, I think she says we're okay. So why don't we just do this? Let me just say, Deb, why don't you just say hello? Just say a
Hello.
couple of words. Okay.
Good evening, you guys.
Okay. Make sure everybody can hear. Claire, you?
Good evening.
Okay. Good. Good evening. And Lorna.
Hello, good evening.
Okay, and Jen, just flag me if we have a problem, otherwise we're gonna keep rolling here, okay? Just give me a thumb up. We're looking at the production studio. Okay, I think we're good. I didn't see the thumb up, but I think we're good. So,
Welcome,
back.
welcome.
Welcome back to the Roundtable. Ronnie and I covering a few topics while we got you guys in here and settled. For part 2 of the show, we welcome 3 of the Democrat-endorsed Board of Ed candidates. Incumbent Board of Education Chair Deb Polun, Vice Chair Dr. Lorna Thomas-Farquarson. I said that correctly. I called Deb to get to make sure I was saying your name correctly because I did not want to mispronounce it. And then Clare Taylor Neseralla, former teacher from right here in West Hartford. So welcome to the show. Thank you very, very much for coming on. I know it was kind of a short notice thing, and I really appreciate you hitting the curveball. And
We're so happy to be here. Thanks for having us on.
well, we're happy to sit back, relax.
I'm
Just
good.
enjoy. It's just TV. There's only like 1 million viewers. So, Claire, all right, let's start with you. We're going to pick on you first. Why? Why are you running for Board of Ed? What's your background? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so in the past 6 or so years, I've been more and more thinking about running for office. And last year, there was an opening and there was an application. So Jason Chang applied and he ended up getting the position. And when I saw his background, I thought, wow, he'd be great on the Board of Ed. So when this opportunity came up, Deb reached out and I thought about it and thought this was the time. I was interested in running the Board of Ed before, but as a teacher in West Hartford, you're not eligible. There's too many conflicts of interest. So 6 years ago, I went to CREC, and I've done a lot with the CREC Senate and with the CREC as an organization, and decided I wanted to come back to West Hartford and add some of the expertise and also pay back West Hartford for the amazing foundation
So
I got.
where did you teach and what grade?
I taught at Duffy for 3 years in 3rd grade and 13 years in 5th grade. And while I was at Duffy, I took advantage of all the Foundation for West Hartford Public School grants. I went to Brazil and Japan. I represented West Hartford in Washington, D.C. And did a lot of really amazing things that allowed me to land this great job at CREC as the STEM coach. So now I work with pre-K to 5th grade students and focus on science, technology, engineering, and math.
I used to report on some of the things that you did in your classroom at Duffy.
Right. And
Some of
so
the projects.
I think in general, we don't promote enough what happens in the schools, and Ronnie used to receive a lot of the press releases, so I regularly would write about neat things that are happening in the school, especially people who don't have kids in the school. They don't always know what's happening, and I think good news stories are great to put in the press.
So, Deb, I'll start with you. It's been a tough few weeks maybe for the Board of Ed, and it's been a tough year and a half for a whole lot of board eds across the country. I've got a clip here I'm going to show, if Jen gives me the go-ahead. We're going to show the audience a quick clip here of something that happened about 3 weeks ago on a Board of Ed. I'm only going to show a few seconds of it, but things like this are happening in Board of Ed meetings. I'm going to show the clip and then let's talk about what happened, okay?
Has since changed. Forcing our children to wear masks is abusive, unhealthy, hinders normal learning and development, and has been proven scientifically not to protect our children from the spread of the China virus, COVID-19. Please do what is
sir, I'm
right.
sorry to interrupt you, but you need to keep your mask on when you speak,
Okay.
over your nose as well. Thank you so much.
Please do what is right and unmask our children. On June
Sir?
1st,
Sir?
Superintendent Tom Moore literally said he wants to indoctrinate our children with critical race theory ideals. We has decided.
Okay, so I think I could let it keep rolling, but I'm gonna stop it. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, or hang this guy out to dry, but obviously it was a very ugly situation. Across the country, people have been showing up at board meetings and attacking board members. This person in particular got into an exchange with you, but then verbally attacked Tom Moore, called him obese, accused the school of indoctrinating kids into critical race theory, and forcing them to wear masks. I'm not clear on what the connection between critical race theory and masks are. And I say this with apologies to the African American community, I'm not sure I even understand what critical race theory is. So can we start on that? What is critical race theory, and is it taught in our schools?
So I'm glad you asked about that, and I'm not 100% certain about all of the ins and outs of critical race theory either, and the reason is I didn't go to law school. Critical race theory is a topic that's taught in law school and some other graduate school programs. It's not taught in a pre-K to 12 setting, and that means it's not taught here in West Hartford in our public school system. What we do teach is empathy. We are working to teach history in a more accurate way, and that does mean confronting some things that we have done as Americans over the course of the last 300 years, 400 years or so since we've been here in North America, some things that we aren't proud of. And kids need to know the true history of our country so that they can learn from it, what we've done well, where we've made mistakes, and how to ensure that we put forward our best foot moving forward. This is one of the most American things that we can do, is learn from our past so that that helps guide us in the future. That does not mean we're teaching critical race theory. It does mean we have to have conversations about race, and we are having conversations about race. I know that's scary for a lot of people. It makes them feel very uncomfortable. It should. It should be uncomfortable, and that's okay. People need to learn how to have uncomfortable conversations, but they need to learn how to have those conversations in a civil way. And so what we're seeing across the country is people who are, on the positive side, becoming civically engaged, which is something I truly do promote, but doing so in a way that is not effective, it's not appropriate, it comes with personal attacks. And so we have some work to do as policymakers, as elected officials, in helping people learn the right way to engage, the best way to get your message across. And that's what we saw in that clip. Somebody who really wanted to get his message across, but wasn't as effective as I think he wanted to be.
And I felt, and obviously we're not here to watch a replay of a meeting that happened 3 weeks ago, but there were, I think, 2 follow-up people who spoke who were against mask mandates in school,
Yep.
but I felt made a very eloquent and well-informed argument to their point.
And you can do that and follow the rules of
Right.
our town.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you, I mean, Deb, this may be totally off the reservation, but I really have to ask the question, are you fearful in these meetings? I mean, is there
I'm
is
not.
there you that's a little nervous, or?
I'm not, but I do want to make sure that the public is safe, and that's something that we need to be very aware of. And so moving forward, we will have police at all of our meetings, and that's not just for the safety of the board members, but also for the safety of the public in the room. And I just want to turn to Lorna in case you wanted to add anything.
Yes, echo a lot, but I'll just wait until the questions are
Okay.
No, you too, please.
So, first of all, thank you for the question. I think that many people ask a similar question that you did, but are afraid to talk about it. And as you made reference to, there are conversations we do have to talk about. So I echo what my colleague Deb has described in terms of how we talk about race and why we need to talk about race. And that just reinforces our role of being on the Board of Education. Let me not even say that. That just reinforces our role of being adults, and those of us that have children, whether biological or helping to care or educate children, that it's our responsibility to try to inform them the best way possible of all aspects of their presence and their being and their history. And as we know, when it comes to American history, and when we think about what history means, that means studying the past events, and that has to be all-inclusive. We can't be selective in what events we talk about. Therefore, we're giving an abridged version of American history. And we do know when it comes to American history, there are many individuals, many communities, many ethnic groups that played a role in helping to build this country to the wonderful country that it is. However, that also means we have to acknowledge the pain and endurance and challenges that many communities and many people had to experience because of that. And when you recognize that, that certainly does acknowledge the economic gains that this country received because of slavery. And when you acknowledge slavery, you also have to uncover the many pieces that help to reinforce slavery, which touches on race, because race is a social construct. Race has no biological basis to it. Race is a social means that was developed and defined by human beings to separate individuals. And as we know, I don't want to take us in history, but that is the origin of race. And this country was built on that origin, and we know that this country is very race conscious. However, you don't have to shy away from that reality. I think when it comes to acknowledging the truths of our past, as uncomfortable as it may be, as you made reference to, we can use that discomfort to empower us in a better position moving forward. And that is our role as members of the Board of Education in terms of supporting policy that helps to implement curriculum, that helps to better educate our young people so that their foundation now will help propel them into a prosperous future. So when it comes to talking about any topics, it is our role to certainly try to help our young people be as well-rounded in their development that is possible, and that includes talking about race and race relations.
And how do you think our schools are doing? How do you think they're doing in coping with COVID, in looking at race, in really giving our children a broad education? And both John and I, our kids went all the way through. Did your kids go through kindergarten?
No, well, we moved to town, but yeah, we started, I think our youngest started kindergarten.
Well, both my kids were K through 12 West Hartford Public Schools, so I love the schools.
Good, good. How are they doing? How are we doing in terms of COVID? How are we doing in terms of talking about race in our curriculum? And some may say, well, those are two separate questions. Well, not necessarily. So in terms of COVID, in terms of the pandemic, we know that that is something that we have experienced within the past year. However, when it comes to addressing pandemic, when we talk about race relations, that also can be equivalent to a pandemic, and that is one that predates COVID-19. So just specifically in terms of how we've responded to COVID-19, I think our school system has done a wonderful job. Why? Because from the beginning, we knew that our purpose was to adhere to science, adhere to safety, and use that as our guiding force moving forward, knowing our forward North Star, rather, is to have our young people back in school in a safe way. And so as we know from the minute that the acuity of COVID was very rampant here in the state, we enacted interventions where the kids were at home, were learning remotely, which was not ideal. We certainly know that. However, that is what was needed at the time to ensure their safety. And then as we know, we unfolded different practices to have them to go into a hybrid method, and now we're back full time. And so our focus all along was recognizing that children do better when they're learning in school. However, because of the pandemic, we had to practice safety measures to secure that. So with your question of how we are addressing race in the school system, we are doing well, and we can do better. I say we're doing well because we recognize that there are areas of growth to expand our curriculum to be more inclusive. And when we talk about race relations, and especially history as it pertains to African American history, it's important that individuals know African American history did not just begin with slavery. It's important for us to recognize that African American history began prior to African Americans coming to this country, where we served as kings and queens, and we ruled lands and had bountiful land accessible to us. And unfortunately, we know what happened when we came here. For some individuals, they don't know that. So when they view the history of African Americans, they view it just from a standpoint of, woe is me, poor you, pity you. Oh, no, 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 no. There is a lot to be proud of. And so as we expand our curriculum, it's important to acknowledge that. And yes, that does also acknowledge the pains and woes that African Americans have experienced while in this country. And so those are the types of conversations in terms of curriculum building that our school system has been responsive to. And we certainly are so thankful to Dr. Rosina Haskins and her leadership with that, but also recognizing we have to collaborate with those in the community as well to help that. We have to maintain those open lines of communication. So we've come far, and we have further to go, but we must continue to have the conversation and the engagement.
I think the communications piece is really, really important, and Lorna touched on this, but just to elevate that piece, this has been a really confusing and disruptive time for everybody, right? And particularly for parents with children. They're trying to balance their own work life with their kids' needs and school and just so many different things. And what we've tried to do as a board and as a school system is communicate, communicate, communicate. So people were always informed about what we were doing and why. We have kept up with communicating around how many individuals in a school tested positive, or how many were in quarantine or isolation, or what the plan was for getting everybody back to school. And information is power. It does help people feel like, I may not be able to control this, but at least I know what's happening. And that's a really, really important piece. And that, I think, comes from the leadership of the board and the administration, and trying to help smooth some of the chaos out for our families in town.
I don't know if this is a question or more of an observation, and you can tell me if accurate or not. You know, we're going through, over the last few years, we're going through this process of really coming to terms with, hey, we have to start teaching this stuff. Then COVID happens. And then in the middle of COVID, George Floyd happens. And we've got Black Lives Matter rallies happening. I mean, Ronnie and I covered the one here in town, happening all over the country. And it to me, and I say this admittedly naively, it was very much of a stark awakening, like wow, the country's really maybe this time finally going to start to come to terms with, like, there is a problem, there is a systemic problem. Is that, I don't know, is that an accurate, I mean, what?
I think for many it was a moment, as some say, woke, but many have been awake for a long time.
Yeah, and I apologize if I wasn't, or maybe didn't realize I wasn't, but it just, I don't, to me, it just seemed like, from a Board of Ed perspective, and the daily challenges you guys faced 2 years ago, I just think have been so complexly multiplied over the last, since March of 2020.
I'll tell you one thing that brought me hope was to see the involvement of students across so many grade levels in town, across town really, getting involved in advocating for a better future for themselves and their peers, regardless of race. And I'm just so optimistic about this next generation. They are organized, they're smart, and they want to make a difference. And I feel really proud of our kids and young adults in this town who went through the West Hartford public school system and who have been trying to make a difference. And we saw that at the rally here at Town Hall and many other situations over the last year or two.
So we've talked about race, we dove right in. Let's say outside of race, Deb, what do you see as the biggest challenges, the biggest obstacles to taking the West Hartford school system to the next level, or even maintaining its excellent standing in the community, in the country?
Well, I mean, obviously the biggest challenge right now is bringing everybody back from COVID and helping to overcome both the learning loss that we acknowledge did occur despite all of our best efforts. We know that there was some learning loss, and also some of the mental health challenges. We've seen that for some kids and teens, coming back to school this year has been a wonderful thing for their emotional well-being. For others, it's yet one more change that has made it, again, more complicated for them. So we do need to focus on making sure that our kids' wellness is prioritized so that they can learn. And we need to put interventions in place to help with the learning loss, and that's what we've been able to do with the federal funding that's come in specifically for that purpose.
Are you also working with higher learning institution colleges, that's why I think state universities, to try to adapt to this learning loss that's occurred? Meaning as they enter college, are you able to work with state universities in particular, Connecticut State Universities, to try to help adapt, to keep that adapting going as they enter college?
I have to say, I don't know the answer to that, whether or not we're communicating on the college level. Have you heard anything about that, Lorna?
Not as specific, but in terms of the communication that was already in place, that continued and maintained, in terms of the mentoring and in terms of the exposing our young people to college campuses virtually, but even more so just exposing them to the possibilities of what life there may be for them after high school. And it may not always be for college. So in terms of vocational opportunities, that also has been maintained. So we really try to maintain some level of I don't want to say normalcy, but some level of consistency, so to speak, even in spite of the compromise we've had to make because of the pandemic and not having real-time access to as many things. So yes, to the specific question, don't know of that piece, but in terms of maintaining what pieces were already in place, that certainly was occurring.
I'll partially answer your question, actually, from the last Board of Education meeting, which focused on the scores, the AP scores. And one thing that Tom Moore, the superintendent, did say is that, or maybe Paul Vicinas, the assistant superintendent, said, is that because there were some fewer numbers of students, not just in West Hartford, but nationally taking AP exams, colleges have all of a sudden had to ramp up the number of sections of intro courses.
Yes.
Where students had been testing out of them. Now, it's not necessarily remedial courses, but it's, you might not have to take intro to
Yeah, English
calculus
101 or-
right,
right.
right. Because you would have tested out of it, but because fewer kids were taking AP exams during COVID, then more of them are needing to take those intro courses at the college level.
There's also accelerated learning is what some of the federal funds have been spent on in many schools, and West Hartford invested in it. And so there's no way to get all the curriculum in for all that was lost. But if you look at what are the core concepts and what are the most essential issues and concepts that kids need, you can help them get through it. And nationwide, all kids were, worldwide, all kids were slowed down a little bit in their learning. But they also gained a lot. And I think we're going to find things that this generation has, ability and their technology skill and the things that they learn. We don't really know what it is now, but I don't think it's all bad. I think there's going to be some resourcefulness and some things that are going to be very beneficial to future employers that our generation of kids who went through COVID learned.
Even learning to smile with your eyes, right? Because you're wearing a mask. So
Yeah.
I think probably the kids are getting adept at reading facial expressions in a way that's different from the way we traditionally read them.
Yeah. It's,
But, pardon
go
me.
ahead, no, please.
Just in terms of this, the one thing that I think we do stand by is last year during the height of the pandemic, in terms of assessment measures, they were not as in-depth, I don't say as in-depth, but not pursued as heavily as traditionally, because they knew we need to focus on the social and emotional wellness of our young people, of our kids. And so I think that was a very realistic and appropriate approach to take when it comes to assessing how someone is. And as we know, when it comes to learning, we have to have that well-rounded approach. It cannot just solely be based on academics. You could have a student who gets all A's, but if they're falling apart every time they go home and they're breaking down because of a simple thing that may happen, we have more to do. So I think that just shows the fluidity that has to happen when it comes to assessing our young people and how their well-being is taking place.
So that brings me to a beautiful lead-in. I could have asked for a better lead-in for my next question. We just had the Republican candidates for council and Board of Ed here, and the Board of Ed candidate brought up that exact issue, that addressing the emotional and mental health of the kids maybe is not happening. Is it happening? How are we dealing with it? What is going on in the schools here in West Hartford with respect to mental health?
If I may say, I'm glad to hear that our Board of Ed candidate acknowledged this, because I was sensing that focus was more so on just their academics. So glad to know there is a wider approach of recognizing the need to have social emotional wellness of our young people. And we certainly are acknowledging that, but we'll never say we're doing it all. We'll never say that we've reached the limit. No. Again, it's a continuous process. So throughout the pandemic, in terms of the connections, in terms of our young people, assessing to see how they are doing, not only were teachers and not only were our clinical staff engaging with them either virtually or in person, they were doing home visits as well. They were making sure to keep the lines of communication with their family members as well. And as we know, it takes a collective effort to see how a person may be doing. So it also means if there were friends, let's say, that had concerns of how another peer may be doing, their friends could reach out and kind of say, hey, I'm concerned of this person or concerned of that person. Pardon me, what is
There's an app, I can't think of what it's called either,
Yes.
but it is an anonymous reporting app. And we've actually had this in place now for a couple of years. It predates the pandemic. And this is a way that kids and teens can reach out and say, my friend needs help, without them feeling like they are, being a tattletale, but feel comfortable to do that. And there are children who are using that app to help their friends get the help that they need. And that has been, I think, really a wonderful addition of technology to this very troubling situation.
I can't remember the name of it either, but I know I've reported on it.
This is where we actually need like a gopher in the background, whisper in our ears, but.
We've also added social workers. We added a trauma interventionist this year because we do want to provide an environment in our schools where kids can get the resources that they need to address their mental health needs.
It's a big challenge. I mean, you hit on, I think, the two biggest challenges coming out of COVID is a lag in the learning and the mental health stuff. My wife is a therapist in town, and the proportion of young children coming to her has grown greatly. I mean, it's just not, you can't dispute it. So, so Claire, let's talk about you. You know, I've said, to me, my perception is Board of Ed is about steering the ship, council's about building the ship. So I ask you this question, understanding that your job is more as an elected official on Board of Ed to steer the ship and not build it, but what are some of your big ideas? Like, you know, if you could, you know, implement anything you'd like, what are some of your big ideas?
So I have a real passion for special education, and I believe it's a national problem, but I think West Hartford could lead in finding a way to help all parents advocate for their child. My daughter has special needs, and because of my background, my education, my ability to speak English, she has advantages. And I feel that it's very hard to understand the IEP, the individual education plan. It's hard to understand a lot of the language. And there's a whole new format coming out this year. So I do think West Hartford could do more to help all parents understand what their child needs and learn to advocate. And currently I work with 120 3- and 4-year-olds in my school, and I take them out into the rain garden and they get specimens and analyze, you know, different plants. They work with microscopes, and I think we could do more for pre-K. Space is an issue, but if this is a national trend, getting a jump start on it for West Hartford would be a good idea. I think there's going to be a real shortage of pre-K teachers out there.
There is now, so you are correct.
And so if it ends up being a national trend, you know, we need to look at how do we handle that, and how do we make sure that West Hartford offers more seats for pre-K. I also think the Foundation for West Hartford Public Schools is a great opportunity for teachers to be supported in creative ideas and ways to get kids more civically engaged, working out in the community, and maybe stepping outside of their neighborhood, meeting other kids at other parts of town, and doing more, being involved in the town.
And for those that don't know, the Foundation for the West Hartford Public Schools is a fabulous organization. They literally just raise money to give to the schools. That's their sole purpose. Ronnie and I have hosted the event. We've been the auctioneers at the event when for the fundraiser. So
We were even an auction item.
we were. A couple of years we were. Dinner with Ronnie and John was an auction item. So that goes back a few years. So if you're not familiar with it, make yourself.
But grants, it's not just giving money to the schools, it's allowing teachers
projects,
or groups of
yeah.
teachers to apply for grants for different types of opportunities than would be available during the normal course of the school day.
So, and I'm being told by our producer that we are up against it in terms of time. So let me just get to, I think the toughest challenge is expense maintenance. You know, how I'll ask the two veterans, because I know you're just stepping in. I don't imagine you've been through the budget too much, but how are we doing at maintaining expenses? You know, big challenges, especially with the additional psychological needs, staff needed on that side of it. How are we doing that?
Well, we've been very fortunate to get federal funds in, about $15 million of federal funds specifically for our schools. And so we have a fantastic finance director for the district, Liz Hewitt, and she has managed to keep it all together. So between the $175 million budget that we have for our schools, and then with the addition of these federal funds, we are able to put into place these interventions short term, you know, for the next year or so. Some will be a little bit longer than a year, to help us get back into the swing of things after the pandemic. But we have to recognize that we're not likely going to be able to keep everything that we've put into place, because that would require us to,
getting the
find
$15
that money
million
somewhere else.
yeah.
So, we have been very good stewards of the taxpayer money. We use evidence-based practices to build our budget. We try to support the programs that we know work. When we can enhance those programs, we do that too. But sure, I mean, the budget, our school budget is a large portion of the town's budget. And the biggest portion of our budget is personnel. And who are the personnel? They're your kids' teachers.
Yep.
right? They're your kids' teachers. And we do want to ensure that our teachers are well cared for, are appreciated, and they do have to get increases here and there too. I mean, they've got bills to pay also. So we keep an eye on it, and we work together, and mostly in a bipartisan way on the board, to target the funds to their best use for our students and families.
All right, Ronnie, any more questions?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, yeah, we're up against it. Two-sentence parting shot, why should we vote for you on November 2nd?
I'm a teacher with a passion for students and working with students. I have 24 years of experience, and I think that would benefit the board.
Lorna, why should we vote for you on November 2nd?
Past 4 years have been committed to the school system. Whether I'm on the board or not, I still be committed to the school system. I have a background that supports that. I'm a parent, and I certainly believe in our children being the leaders for tomorrow, so I want to commit to investing in them today.
Thank you. Deb, why should we vote for you on November 2nd?
It's really been an honor to serve our town as a member of the Board of Education over the past 4 years. I'd like to keep that going. I think we need steady leadership on the board, particularly right now as we approach these rocky waters and navigate through them, and that's why I'm hoping for your support.
All right, well, thank you all very much for coming in. Ronnie, another one in the books.
Thank you.
Any last words before we say goodnight?
I hope that maybe the next time we can do this
Yeah.
without the
Without
masks.
these.
And thank you for putting up with, not being able to see our full faces, and hopefully it hasn't muffled any of the speaking.
Yeah, and thank you for following the mask mandate, and thanks too to the Republican candidates for coming in and following the mask mandate as well. It's the rules. We got to follow the rules, and hopefully,
do indeed.
hopefully the rules will change soon. So, and hopefully things will calm down at our future Board of Ed meetings, because it's really unfair. I'm gonna part with the same reminder that I parted with the Republicans, that these folks are running for office free of charge. In other words, they do not get paid for serving the community. So treat them as such. There's no reason to get on somebody because there's a D or an R next to their name, especially when they're doing it for free. They're doing it because they care about our community. And to a person, I truly believe that. So thank you all for coming in. Ronnie, thank you as always.
Thank you very much.
Our next show.
Don't forget to vote.
Yep, don't forget to vote November 2nd. Then
There
we
you
do have
go.
another show coming up. We're going to try to get the chiefs in, the fire chief, the police chief, and then after the election, after tonight, a moratorium goes into effect. Basically, we can't interview any more political candidates. This was the cutoff, so we're really up against it. So we are going to have Sherry and Matt Hart. We're going to do that right after the election. We've been waiting to do that town hall for a while, and then we've got the two chiefs hopefully later this month. So with that, thank you for tuning in. For WeHow.com, I'm John Lyons with Ronnie Newton, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.